You just got a promotion, 20% raise. You're excited, you tell your close friends, maybe post something subtle on social media. Within a week, 3 friends ask you for loans, your family starts hinting about helping out more, and suddenly everyone assumes you're picking up the dinner tab. 2 months later, you're actually more stressed about money than you were before the raise. Sound familiar? My name is Elon Musk, and I spend way too much time thinking about the hidden costs of financial transparency. If you're someone who's ever felt weird about discussing money, who's been burned after sharing good financial news, or who can't figure out why talking about your income makes everything awkward, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because here's the thing, we're constantly told that transparency is good, that we should be open about our finances, that discussing money openly fights inequality. And look, there's truth to that. But what nobody talks about is that financial transparency has real, measurable costs. And for most people, those costs are quietly destroying their wealth without them even realizing it. Let me show you what I mean with some actual numbers. A 2023 study from Fidelity found that 44% of Americans who disclosed a salary increase to friends or family reported increased requests for financial help within 6 months. But here's where it gets really interesting. The average amount given or loaned was $3,200 per year. That's not a one-time thing. That's an annual tax on transparency. Now you might be thinking, well, helping friends and family is a good thing. And you're right, but let's do the math on what this actually costs you long-term. If you're 30 years old and you're giving away $3,200 per year that you could have been invested at a conservative 8% annual return over 35 years until retirement, that's not $112,000 of gifts. That's $517,000 of potential retirement wealth. $500,000, that's the real cost. But the transparency tax goes way beyond just direct requests for money. Here's what most people don't realize. When you're transparent about your financial success, you unknowingly give everyone around you permission to hold you to a higher standard of spending. Let me give you a concrete example. You mentioned you got a raise at a friend's dinner party. 3 weeks later, someone suggests going to a nicer restaurant than your group usually frequents. Nobody says it out loud, but there's this implicit assumption, well, you can afford it now. You don't want to look cheap. You don't want to seem like you were bragging about a raise but won't spend it. So you go to the next expensive outing and the next one. Research from the Journal of Consumer Psychology found that individuals who disclosed income increases spent an average of 23% more on social activities within the following year, even when their actual financial obligations hadn't changed. 23%. Let's put real numbers to this. Say you were spending $400 a month on dining out, entertainment, and social activities. After your raise and the transparency about it, that jumps to $492 a month. That's an extra $1,104 per year. Invested over 35 years, that's another $241,000. We're now at $750,000 in lifetime cost, and we're just getting started. This is where it gets really frustrating, because this one hits you when you're trying to build wealth. When you're financially transparent, you lose negotiating power, period. Here's a scenario, you're looking to buy a car. The salesperson asks what you do for a living. It seems like small talk. You mention you're a software engineer at a big tech company. Congratulations, you just told them you can afford to pay more. A study by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that car buyers who signaled higher income paid, on average, $1,350 more for identical vehicles than those who didn't disclose income indicators. But it's not just car dealers, it's contractors, wedding vendors, real estate agents, even insurance companies. When people know you have money, prices mysteriously increase. The quote gets higher, the estimate has more padding. I've got a friend who's a general contractor, and he told me something that blew my mind. He said he has 3 different pricing structures. One for clients he thinks are struggling, one for middle-income families, and one for what he calls high earners who won't blink at the number. Same work, same materials, different prices based entirely on perceived ability to pay. Now you might be thinking that's just smart business. Maybe, but it's costing you money every single time someone knows your financial situation. Look, let's talk about something that makes people really uncomfortable. Financial transparency changes your relationships, and not always for the better. The University of Michigan study followed 1,200 people over 5 years and found that 67% of individuals who experienced significant income increases relative to their peer group reported decreased relationship satisfaction with those peers. 2/3. The researchers found that money transparency created what they called invisible hierarchies that poison the natural equality most friendships are built on. Here's how this plays out in real life. You and your college friends used to split everything evenly, make similar choices, live similar lives. Then you get a better job, buy a nicer car, move to a better neighborhood. Even if you never mention your income, the transparency is there in your lifestyle. Suddenly there's this weird tension. People make comments, must be nice. I wish I could afford that. Some of us have student loans. The friendship doesn't end, it just changes. There's a distance that wasn't there before. And if you're the person with less money, there's resentment. If you're the person with more, there's guilt. Either way, there's cost. And here's the really insidious part. This dynamic makes people do one of two things. Either they hide their success and feel like they're living a lie, or they downgrade their lifestyle to match their friends and sacrifice their own financial goals to preserve social harmony. I know people who drive older cars than they can afford because they don't want their neighbors to know they're doing well. I know people who pretend they can't afford things they absolutely can because they don't want to create distance with friends. That's the hidden social cost of financial transparency. Now let's talk about something that affects way more people than you'd think. When you're financially transparent, you become a target. I'm not even talking about scams or fraud, though that's real too. I'm talking about the constant barrage of people who want a piece of what you've built. The moment people know you have money, you start getting pitched investment opportunities, multi-level marketing schemes, your cousin's startup, your neighbor's rental property partnership, that friend from high school who suddenly reconnects on LinkedIn with a business opportunity. A 2022 survey by Mutual found that 58% of people with investable assets over $100,000 reported receiving unsolicited investment pitches from friends, family, or acquaintances at least quarterly. Here's the thing though, most of these opportunities are garbage, but saying no damages relationships. You're seen as selfish, as someone who made it and won't help others. So people say yes, not because the investment is good, but because the social pressure is overwhelming. The average loss on these friend and family investments, according to Cambridge Associates, investors in these informal deals lose money 74% of the time, with average losses of $18,500 per investment. And most people make multiple investments like this over their lifetime, either out of guilt or pressure or just not wanting to seem like a jerk. Here's what most people don't realize. The real cost of financial transparency isn't just the money you lose directly. It's the psychological burden that comes with it. When your finances are transparent, you're no longer making money decisions based on what's best for you. You're making them based on what other people will think. That's not financial planning, that's social performance, and it's exhausting. Behavioral economists call this audience effect, and the research is pretty clear. When people know others are watching their financial decisions, they make worse decisions. They spend more on visible consumption and less on investments. They prioritize appearing successful over actually building wealth. They choose short-term social approval over long-term financial security. A study in the Journal of Financial Psychology found that individuals who felt their financial decisions were being observed by their social circle saved 31% less for retirement and spent 27% more on conspicuous consumption. Think about that. The simple act of people watching what you do with money makes you save less and spend more on stuff that doesn't matter. So here's where we pivot, because I'm not saying you should lie about your finances or hide everything. What I'm saying is there's a smarter approach that most wealthy people figured out a long time ago. It's called stealth wealth, and it's not about pretending to be poor. It's about being strategically opaque about your financial situation. Look, Elon Musk, the real one, drives a modest car and lives in a house he bought in 1958 for $31,500. Mark wears the same gray t-shirt and hoodies. These aren't people who can't afford nice things. They're people who understand that financial transparency has costs they don't want to pay. Here's the practical approach. You can be transparent about financial principles without being transparent about financial specifics. You can talk about the importance of investing without mentioning your portfolio balance. You can discuss retirement strategies without revealing your net worth. You can help friends understand money without disclosing your salary. The key is creating what I call strategic ambiguity. When someone asks directly about your income or your finances, you've got options that don't require lying. I'm doing okay, but I'm trying to be more intentional about saving. We're comfortable, but we're focused on building for the future. I don't really like talking specific numbers, but I'm happy to share strategies that have worked for me. These responses acknowledge the question without giving ammunition that can be used against you later. Let me give you some concrete, actionable steps to protect yourself from the transparency tax. First, create separate social contexts. Have friends you do expensive activities with and friends you do budget activities with. This isn't about being fake. It's about not forcing lifestyle inflation on people who can't afford it or making them feel bad about their financial situation. Second, delay lifestyle inflation when you get raises or promotions. If you wait 6-12 months before upgrading your lifestyle, people forget about your financial wins and you avoid that immediate social pressure to spend more. Plus, you get to actually save and invest that money first. Third, normalize talking about financial strategies without disclosing numbers. Share that you max out your 401k without mentioning that you make $150,000. Discuss your investment in index funds without revealing your portfolio is worth $400,000. This lets you be helpful without painting a target on your back. Fourth, and this is crucial, learn to say no without explanation. "That doesn't work for my budget right now" is a complete sentence. You don't owe anyone a breakdown of your finances to justify your decisions. Fifth, if you do lend money to friends or family, do it through formal agreements. I know it feels weird, but a written loan agreement with repayment terms protects both of you. And honestly, if someone gets offended that you want to formalize a loan, that's a red flag that they never intended to pay you back anyway. Now let's talk about something that affects everyone who works for someone else: salary transparency in the workplace. There's this huge push right now for salary transparency, for companies to post pay ranges, for employees to share what they make. And look, I get the argument. In theory, it helps reduce pay inequity, it gives workers more negotiating power, it fights discrimination. But here's what the data actually shows. A 2024 study from the Business Review found that in companies that implemented full salary transparency, overall pay satisfaction actually decreased by 18%. Not because people were being paid unfairly, but because knowing what everyone else makes created constant comparison and resentment. The people making more than average felt guilty or became targets for resentment. The people making less than average felt undervalued, even if they were being paid fairly for their role and experience. The transparency created problems that didn't exist before. And here's the kicker: in that same study, voluntary turnover increased by 13% in the 2 years following transparency implementation. People left jobs they were previously happy with because they found out someone else made $8,000 more, even though that person had 3 more years of experience. I'm not saying salary transparency is always bad. I'm saying it has costs that the advocates don't want to talk about. And on an individual level, you need to be really strategic about what you disclose and to whom. If your company posts salary ranges, great, that's out of your hands, but you don't have to tell you exactly where you fall in that range. You don't have to share your bonuses or your stock options. You can be supportive of workplace equity without giving everyone a detailed breakdown of your compensation package. This is where it gets really interesting, because the transparency tax affects different generations completely differently. Millennials and Gen Z are way more open about finances than previous generations. A survey found that 42% of millennials have discussed their exact salary with friends, compared to just 18% of baby boomers. On the surface, that seems like progress: more openness, less taboo, more equity. But here's what the numbers don't show. Those same millennials are also saving less, carrying more consumer debt, and feeling more financial stress than previous generations at the same age, even accounting for student loans and housing costs. I'm not saying transparency is the only cause, but I am saying there's a correlation worth examining. When you're transparent about your finances, you're subject to more social pressure, more comparison, more judgment, and that creates stress that leads to worse financial decisions. Baby boomers kept their money quiet, invested consistently, lived below their means, and built wealth. Millennials share everything, feel pressured to keep up with everyone, and struggle to save. I know which strategy has worked better historically. Now you might be thinking, okay, but what about accountability? What about learning from others? What about fighting income inequality? And those are fair questions, because there are benefits to some level of financial openness. The key is finding the right balance. Here's my recommendation: be transparent about your financial journey and struggles, not about your current numbers. You can tell people you're working to pay off debt without telling them you have $47,000 in student loans. You can share that you're investing for retirement without revealing you have $300,000 in your 401k. You can talk about the raise you're hopping for without disclosing your current salary. This gives you the benefits of community, support, and accountability without paying the transparency tax. And here's the thing about income inequality: you sharing your salary with your friends doesn't fix systemic problems. It just creates tension in your personal relationships. If you want to fight for equity, advocate for policy changes, support unions, vote for politicians who prioritize workers' rights. But don't sacrifice your own financial security by oversharing in the name of a cause that requires structural solutions, not individual transparency. Let's bring this all together with the actual numbers, because the math is what makes this real. We talked about $517,000 lost to increased requests for financial help, $241,000 lost to lifestyle inflation from social pressure. Let's add another $50,000 lost to poor informal investments, and another $30,000 paid in transparency premiums to vendors who price discriminate based on perceived income. That's $838,000. Over 35 years of your working life, financial transparency could cost you close to $1 million in lost wealth. Now, does this mean you become completely secretive about your finances? No, it means you become intentional about what you share with whom and when. It means you protect your financial life the same way you protect any other valuable asset. Because here's what most people don't realize. Money is private not because it's shameful, but because it's powerful, and powerful things require protection. So here's what you do starting today. 1. Audit your current level of financial transparency. Who knows specific numbers about your income, savings, or net worth? Is that helping you or hurting you? 2. Develop your strategic ambiguity responses. Practice saying things like, "I'm comfortable but always working to do better," or "That's not really something I discuss," without feeling guilty. 3. Create separation between your financial reality and your lifestyle signals. You can be wealthy without looking wealthy. In fact, that's how most actually wealthy people operate. 4. Be generous on your terms, not on demand. If you want to help people financially, do it proactively and strategically, not when asked. This puts you in control. 5. Invest in financial education for yourself, not just financial disclosure to others. The more you understand money, the less you need validation or comparison from other people. Look, here's the bottom line. Financial transparency is sold to us as this morally superior position, as if being open about money makes you a better person. But the data tells a different story. The data says that financial transparency costs you money, damages relationships, increases stress, and makes you a target. The wealthiest people in the world aren't the most transparent, they're the most strategic. They understand that money is a tool, not an identity. They know that protecting their financial privacy isn't about shame or secrecy, it's about security and freedom. You get to decide how much you share. You get to decide who has access to information about your financial life, and you don't owe anyone an explanation for keeping that information private. The cost of being financially transparent is real, it's measurable, and for most people it's way too high. So be intentional, be strategic, and understand that sometimes the most responsible thing you can do for your financial future is to keep your mouth shut about it. If this changed how you think about money and transparency, hit that like button and subscribe for more real talk about building wealth without the BS. Drop a comment and let me know, are you team financial transparency or team stealth wealth? And remember, the best investment you can make is in your own financial security. Don't let social pressure cost you your future. I'll see you in the next one.